Hi from Boston. It's just the three of us here. We should have our own private conversation. And Schenectady, New York is here. Ohio, now people are coming in. Atlanta, Massillon, Ohio. That was a major town in the 19th century. Melbourne, Florida. Dacula, Georgia. I've never heard of that. Seattle, Maryland, Virginia, Utah, Pennsylvania. Once again, we'll wait for Facebook to show up. Minnesota, boy, it must be beautiful up there right now. Philadelphia, Rhode Island, another Minnesota, Johnson City, Tennessee. Powell, Ohio. Good trouble. Absolutely. Today is the 5th anniversary of the death of John Lewis. Old Orchard Beach. I hope you had a nicer day there than we did here. But I will tell you, Facebook is here. Super. I will tell you that I'm a little discombobulated today, as you can tell, because we had a family wedding here last weekend, which means that all of my siblings are here with all of their children. And that's been absolutely lovely. And I was one of those incredibly lucky people who got to be auntie to all of my nieces and nephews. And so I just went out this afternoon playing with two of my nephews that I used to play with many, 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 many years ago. And we did some of the things we did when they were small children. And I have to say that now I'm a little bit older. They are now young men, and I'm tired. I was better at that when I was in my 40s than I am now that I'm in my 60s. But by God, we swam for an hour. So that's why I'm wet and tired. All right, I'm going to start right in here because that you have questions, and I may be, because I didn't announce this, there may be a few enough people here that you can throw questions in the chat, and I will look for them if you do that. But there are some things I wanted to say because we're in this really bizarre week where it's been more than a week now, where the scandal over the Epstein files has knocked the pins out from under President Donald Trump. And that has meant a number of shifts in the American political scene that are hard to follow, but that are also beginning to show up some new discussions that I want to call out right now. And the first of those that I am seeing in a number of places where people are trying to justify the Trump administration's refusal to release any more information about Jeffrey Epstein and his the extraordinary transfer of money that enabled him to run this island where older men raped young girls, is the first piece of that is that I'm seeing a lot of people say, well, oh, it just proves that all politicians are horrible, because at heart, the Epstein fight for information, more information, is not just about the assaults on those girls. It is also about the belief that rich and powerful men get away with committing crimes. And so one of the things that I have started to see is people saying, well, all politicians are liars and cheats. And I want to push back on that in a pretty profound way, not only anecdotally. I know a number of politicians now, and there really are politicians who are deeply committed to doing what they think is right for the American people. And so not everybody is corrupt. What we do have, though, is a system that currently encourages corruption. That is, on the face of things, neither Democrats nor Republicans by nature are more or independents or whatever, by nature are more prone to corruption. But the democratic system is designed to root out corruption. And right now, our democratic system is not doing that. So let me explain what I mean by that. As I say, neither Republicans nor Democrats are especially prone to corruption unless you get a system in which the system has been sewn up by one party that there is not sufficient oversight of it. And that begins to be a one-party state. And when you have a one-party state, you don't have oversight of the behavior of certain politicians in certain roles. And that is very much what we see in one-party states. So think of the American South between about 1874 and 1965, when Theoretically, there were challenged elections, and indeed there were challenged elections in some places at some times. But for the most part, it was pretty clear that the Southern Democrats were going to win. It was called the Solid South because the Democrats controlled the South. And that meant that there was no incentive for politicians to say, hey, Joe over there is stealing from the public till, or hey, Mike over there is, abusing workers, because they were only interested in protecting their party. And you can see that around the US today in states that are distinctively one party states, like Florida, for example, where there's been a big scandal involving Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and his wife. Ohio has had a major scandal, Mississippi. The thing that you need to do in a democracy is to make really sure that both parties are viable at the state and other levels as well, but at the state level, so that the other party is always watching the party in power like a hawk. And the media is willing to step up and say, hey, we're going to publish this story about so and so's corruption. Because unless you have that oversight, if you have a one party state, you create conditions in which, first of all, corrupt politicians thrive because nobody's minding the store. But also it makes it much more difficult for non-corrupt politicians to stay honest, because if there's no pushback against them doing a favor for their brother-in-law, it's easier just to do that favor and not to. So one of the things that we need to do going forward is to restore the ability of at least two major parties to be viable candidates for control of state governments. And the reason I gave you that, first of all, is because that idea that somehow all politicians are corrupt is simply not right. What we have done is we have created conditions in which corrupt politicians are able to survive. And it's not good for either party. It's not good for the American people. It enables corrupt people to get much higher than they would if they were weeded out at lower levels. You look at some of the politicians in Florida, for example, who never would have made it out of local government, much less to state or national government, if there had been oversight. We're going to want to return that ability of both major parties or more to have control over state and national government, or you're going to have more and more and more corrupt government. All right, so that was obviously a setup to something. It's important in its own right, because again, it's not that that all politicians are corrupt. Politicians are human. None of them's perfect by any stretch of the imagination. They all make mistakes the same way we all do as humans. But you can create a culture in which that is minimized, in which corruption is minimized, and you can make it so that they would rather not be corrupt if that's possible. But what we're seeing right now is a system in which the MAGA Republicans, helped by 40 years of Republican machinations, have managed to create a situation in which they are essentially one party rulers of a number of different states. And that's raising all kinds of red flags going forward. It's got red flags for the past, but it's also got red flags going forward. And where I'm going with that is that the Trump administration right now is crazy unpopular. It is underwater on all of its major initiatives. Trump's numbers are as low as Biden's were after that disastrous debate of about, I guess it was a year ago. This is not a popular administration. And the more people learn about it, the more they dislike it. At the same time, you're also seeing inflation kicking in again as the Trump tariffs start to bite. People really loathe ICE rounding up individuals who have never been charged with a crime, let alone convicted of one, and throwing people into detention camps, including ones like that in the Everglades, where we recently learned, I guess it was today, we learned that a 15-year-old boy who has no criminal charges or anything has been incarcerated there, obviously without due process, along with a whole bunch of men. And people don't like that. They have never liked that. And that increasing dislike of the current Republican Party has raised an issue for it going into the midterm elections and the 2028 presidential elections. And this has a long history behind it. What they are trying to do now is to skew our electoral process so that they can establish a one-party state over the entire nation. And you're seeing that in two ways right now. You're seeing that, first of all, with the attempt of the Trump administration to begin to control voting in the states. Remember, states control voting within their own borders. So you're seeing the Trump administration trying to take over the oversight of voting within the states. And you're also seeing it in things like the pressure coming from the White House to redistrict the state of Texas to, as Trump says, pick up 5 more seats for the Republicans. That is essentially to permit Republican lawmakers to choose their own voters so that they can stay in power. Now, that just to step back in a big picture way again here, really, really important to remember that there's a huge difference between voter fraud and election fraud. So voter fraud is what the Republican Party has hammered on since 1986, when it became clear that the American people did not like the tax cuts of the Reagan Revolution and the service cuts of the Reagan Revolution. And that is the argument that people are cheating when they vote. And since 1986, there has been a real focus, not really, since 1986, the idea was to clean up Black voting. But in 1994, after the 1993 Motor Voter Act, in 1994, the Republicans began to say that Democrats were winning elections only because they were having immigrants vote. To be really clear about this, there is no evidence of this. The voting fraud is vanishingly rare. On the rare occasions we have seen it lately, it is usually actually a Republican voting in 2 different places, or voting for a deceased spouse, or voting in some way in a place that they are not eligible to vote. There are always accusations that there is voter fraud. There has been virtually no proof of that. So if you read the articles about it really carefully, you will see that there's all these people who might have committed voter fraud. But the actual number of people who is found, I think your chances of finding somebody who's committed voter fraud are extraordinarily small, because what's the payoff for it? I mean, it is illegal to do that. So if you are somebody who can't vote legally, why would you take that risk in order to have your vote maybe make a difference in a very little way? By the way, this argument that people are importing voters goes all the way back to 1879. And that's an interesting rabbit hole that I probably won't go down today. But you have this idea that there is voter fraud. And so the Republicans, the MAGA Republicans, are now trying to put up all kinds of walls to make it harder and harder and harder to vote. And as I say, they've been doing this since 1986, and really it has taken off after 2013 with the Shelby County versus Holder decision, which essentially gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But you're seeing it really ramp up. And you're also seeing, as we have really seen since 2010, the idea of gerrymandering states, so that even in a 50-50 state like North Carolina, the Republicans get most of both the state legislature and the congressional districts. So this is really ramping up right now. As I say, Trump is putting pressure on Texas to redistrict in the middle of the decade. Remember, we have a census every 10 years in order to count how many people, not citizens, but people, are in states, so that they can be districted in such a way that those states are fairly represented both at the state and at the national level. And Trump's really pressuring Texas to hold a mid-decade redistricting so that Republicans can pick up more seats in Texas. Trump has actually said he wants 5 more seats out of Texas. This is not the way democracy is supposed to work. And in retaliation for that, Gavin Newsom of California has said to Texas, go ahead, you try and redistrict Texas, then I will redistrict California. Again, this is not so for more Democrats. That's not the way this whole system is supposed to work. And one of the things that I really hope people will keep their eyes on is going forward and work at is just making sure that representation is fair, that people get to vote. I mean, that's pretty basic. And by the way, that's popular in all parties. Democrats, independents, and Republicans all want to get rid of gerrymandering, and they all want to get rid of voter suppression. All right. If that's voter suppression and voter fraud, which is so rare, this idea that there's voter fraud, that basically the arguments for it are suppressing the vote. What is actually fairly common is election fraud. And that's when you skew the mechanics of the election in such a way that you win, even though most people didn't want you to win. And that's what we're facing with these machinations that you're seeing going on in the states and from the national government going into 2026 and 2028. And again, one of the things I'm really going to push for going forward is that people know this is happening, speak out against it, put pressure at the state level to push back against it, at the national level, support those organizations that are funding lawsuits to make sure this doesn't happen. Because when I look at where we are right now, and I see everything with a historical lens, and a lot of it with the lens of the 19th century, because that's really where my heart is. I see what happened to the American South after the Civil War. And one of the questions I always used to get from my students is, why didn't people fight back when former Confederates took the vote away from Black Americans and from poor white Americans? Because remember, they get shut out of the vote as well in the American South after 1890. Why didn't people fight back? And we're sitting here watching that in real time happen. And it's giving me some answers that surprised me. One of them, I think, is that people don't really see that it's happening. It's very clear to a historical eye that we are seeing a very small group of people exert their power over the government in such a way that they're able to control voting, they're able to control elections so that they can stay in power. But I'm not sure you can see it when you're on the ground. And I wanted to call that out today because I really wanted people to recognize that that we got to fight back against that. And again, think about it like the late 19th century, when it really wasn't clear to a lot of people. It was clear to some people, but it was not clear to a lot of people, not least because in the American South until the 1900s, there really were viable third-party options in a number of the states, and often Black voting in those states could turn an election. So it was a little hard for people to recognize that there was a wholesale disfranchisement going on when they could look in their newspapers and see that there was a meeting of Republicans, for example, in the American South. They just never won. And that idea of commandeering the elections in such a way that only one party can win seems to me to be going national now. And it's going national under the Republican Party. Really important to remember that this is a deeply unpopular administration and that MAGA is a deeply unpopular movement. And the issues on which the administration keeps insisting it's so popular are actually underwater by as much as 20 points. And that means that just an example here, that if 60% of people dislike something and 40% of people like it, that's a 20-point difference. That's not a percentage, that's 20 points. And that's a lot. And that's what we're seeing in popular reactions, for example, to the ICE sweeps. And certainly the tariffs are enormously unpopular. Nobody likes inflation. The budget reconciliation bill has been extraordinarily unpopular. And we just saw today, I think, the passage through the Senate of that rescission bill that I've been talking about and writing about. And that is a real power grab, again, by the administration, saying that it simply did not disperse the money that Congress told it to. And they asked Congress to simply say, okay, that's fine. You don't have to spend that money. And what that has done right now in this iteration, and it hasn't passed back through the House yet, which it must do by tomorrow, although many of us expect that it will pass through the House. What that means is that we have just lost whatever federal funding there was for NPR and PBS, and for about $9.4 billion of other programs that Americans liked and that that Congress people put into law that Donald Trump and the administration then said, no, that's fine. We're not going to spend that money, even though you told us to. So I just saw somebody ask me to explain how the party switched sides. And I have done that a lot, but it occurs to me rather than doing this now, I should probably do a separate video about that, shouldn't I? A short one. So I'll put that on the list. Like I said, it's been a crazy summer for me because of this wedding and because of all the family being here, and that's just about to wind down. And then, I keep saying I'm hoping this week will be the one that I get my life in order, but I sort of feel like that's on the cusp of things. All right, so there's other things going on here as well, though, in the midst of all this, as I'm talking about the concerns about a one-party state and the deliberate push for the Supreme Court, for example, to consolidate power in the executive branch, which I talked about on Tuesday. There is also a number of things that are unsettling the administration and are unsettling MAGA. And that's right now, I've talked about some of the things, the fact that people like Tucker Carlson didn't like Trump bombing Iran, and Joe Rogan doesn't like the ICE sweeps. And, there are different reasons that MAGA is falling away from Trump. But this Epstein file thing is big. It's really interesting because it's coming from within MAGA, and I think that makes all the difference in the way people are looking at it. And it also is very clearly deeply disturbing Trump. So yesterday he came out and attacked his own people as being weaklings, foolish, and stupid, and said he did not want their support. That's a man who's rattled, and he's not been mentally healthy now for a while. That's been very clear. But that attacking of his own people for wanting what he promised them he would do, release the Epstein files, has shown a real split in MAGA. And we don't know how that's going to come out at all, but there is fallout from that already. So one of the things that you have seen today is that, or that if you were watching the news, you saw today, is that White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt came out and said that Trump has a chronic illness, a chronic condition with his veins that is causing the bruising that people have noticed and the swollen ankles that were photographed at the FIFA World Cup. So that's really an interesting thing for her to have done, because remember, this administration always just maintains he's in the best of health. Remember, he's going to live forever. He's in fabulous shape. He's all that stuff that was never at all true. They have never volunteered health information about him. Never. So why they have done it now, I'm not going to speculate on. I will just tell you that, as I often say when I'm looking at the news, that to me, it's like watching cement come out of a cement truck. And this is literally how I visualize it. There's a lot of stuff that comes out and it's mesmerizing to watch, but you don't really have to pay attention to it. But if all of a sudden you see a bright plastic child's toy in that cement, or a leaping carp, those are the two things I think of, you pay attention. And her talking about his health in such a way that she admitted that he is ill was a child's plastic toy for me. I don't know what it means, but I do know it is a huge change from anything we've seen before. So you're seeing that, but you're also seeing a real sloshing around of power now, as it certainly looks as if Trump is vulnerable. It is not clear who will pick up the power that was amassed behind Trump. Somebody to watch very closely is Steve Bannon, who's a very smart man who is very good with media. He was largely, in many ways, responsible for Trump's rise, not exclusively, but he had a lot to do with it. And he clearly sees himself as a power broker. There are signs that Republicans are ready now that they have that budget reconciliation bill in place that gave them the tax cuts that they wanted so desperately, that they don't really need Trump anymore. He's not in good health. They've gotten the only measure they're going to get from him because it was an omnibus bill essentially. And you can start to see people starting to throw elbows a bit and trying to figure out what comes after Trump. So this is one of the things that people like me are watching. And they're also, everybody is now watching how rattled Trump is over Epstein and the fact that stories are dropping. So just today, we have a story from Ron Wyden, a senator from Oregon, I hope. That's right, Oregon, I think, um, who has said, my people have been looking into the financing of Epstein now for 3 years, and because those reports have come through, suspicious activity reports or SARs that banks have to file if they see suspicious activity, but those have very strong guardrails about who has access to that information. He says, we have found more than $1.1 billion of cash transfers going through one bank of four. Each one of them had more money, that had additional money. One had $1.1 billion that was associated with Epstein going through it. And he says, let's look at these numbers. Let's look at where this money came from and where it went to, because some of where that money went was to young women in Baltic states, which is the area from which Epstein appeared to have recruited the people that he was moving to his island with these older men. So we have that story that broke, and we also had a story that broke just very recently from the Wall Street Journal saying that it has an Epstein story that the White House is trying very, very hard to silence. We've had a story from 404 Media saying that they have been able to decode some of the names associated with Epstein. More and more and more is dropping. And as that happens, as Trump appears to look weaker, you are also seeing more rumblings from within the administration saying, for example, the way National Guard troops said today, we didn't want to be deployed. We don't want to be part of this. Or the way Michelle, I think her name is Maureen. I'm sorry, I don't remember. Comey, the woman from the Department of Justice, the daughter of James Comey, today producing a letter telling her Department of Justice colleagues, don't be afraid, we got to keep fighting. You're seeing more people starting to back away. Now, that's not at all to say that this is a done deal, that we are through with this administration or through with Donald Trump, but that this is an extraordinarily unsettled time. I'm sorry, someone just said Maureen. Thank you, Maureen Comey. This is an extraordinarily unsettled time, and that means it is a time of possibility to keep the pressure up and to say, this is not the kind of government we want. So let me answer a couple more questions that you asked. You asked about, no, I talked about the shadow docket the other day. Oh, here we go. Here's where I'll go. People asked what's happening behind the scenes while everybody is watching the Epstein files. And I have to say, there are, I watch the news really carefully. And yesterday, there was actually something entirely different that I wanted to write about. And this is the story. This Epstein story is the story right now. There are other things going on. We have had more information about the fact that the administration appears to have rendered more people to third countries than we knew. And there are media channels that are finding some of those names because they have not released all the names. We also have had inspections of the detention facility in the Everglades, which I refuse to call by the name that they're making shirts out of. Suggesting again that there was a 15-year-old sent there, that most of the people there have never even been charged with a crime, let alone convicted. The conditions are appalling, and so on. There are those stories continuing on. There is also, I think, a very important story that I will be writing about, which is actually what I wanted to write the other day, that's gotten almost no traction, a crazy small amount of traction. Well, one of those is the fact that the administration is trying to determine who gets to vote. But also, there is a move afoot, and J.D. Vance is part of it, to change the way Americans think about citizenship. And this is a really big deal. So if you have been following social media, the Department of Homeland Security released an image a number of days ago of a young white couple in what appeared to be a covered wagon playing with a baby. And they had a caption about protecting the homeland. And the story gets very deep and very convoluted very quickly because they never consulted with the artist who made that image, who actually had a very different, quite innocuous title for it, and which changed the entire meaning of the picture. But that picture with the caption, which had a capital HH in it, which is a dog whistle for Heil Hitler, and there were a number of dog whistles in this picture, but and it was people like historians who understand the symbolism of the American West and the symbolism of authoritarianism, our hackles went up in a hurry. But a lot of people did not make the connection to a speech that Vice President J.D. Vance gave at the Claremont Institute 2 weekends ago, in which, the whole thing starts out talking about how Democrats are our enemies and all that usual language. But then it talks about citizenship. And this is a really important concept. So you remember how Joe Biden was always talking about how America is an idea, democracy is an idea. And that is the way Americans have imagined American democracy really all along. And quite dramatically, in his last public speech before he left office, Ronald Reagan did the same thing. I mean, quite literally, in a lot of ways, Biden was echoing Ronald Reagan, who was a Republican. So this is really the way Americans have thought about citizenship, that if you believe in the ideals of the Declaration of Independence, it doesn't matter where you come from, you are an American. You can be an American by accepting those ideals. The MAGA Republicans don't believe that. Now, they are arguing for a kind of citizenship that's based in the idea of what they have called, or what others have called, blood and soil. And that's a Nazi slogan. It actually starts in the 1930s. And what it means is that people who are associated with a certain nationality, long-term nationality, and a certain kind of land are citizens in a way that people from away, or people, that's the main expression, I'm sorry, immigrants never can be. And that idea is entirely antithetical to what the United States has ever been. So, and Vance pushed this very hard, as I say in this speech, and kept talking about how, people who were here during the Civil War are more Americans than people who just got here yesterday. That is 100% not what America has ever stood for. The whole idea has been that you can come to the United States and you can be an American, and the person who came and became a citizen yesterday is just as much an American as somebody whose family has been here since the days of the Pilgrims, which is one of the things that has made America a really cool place to be, is because we're constantly reinventing ourselves. And that's been our great strength. In fact, that's what Reagan said in that last speech, is this is America's great strength. And when we stop doing that, we'll desiccate, and become old and cease to be America any longer. That idea is what got picked up in that image that Homeland Security circulated. The idea that if you are here for a really long time, you're white, you're heteronormative, you've been on the soil. And by the way, it has nothing to do, by the way, with Indigenous Americans. This is who've been on the soil way longer than the people represented by that wagon. The idea is that those people are more American than people of color, essentially, and Black Americans, and certainly Indigenous Americans. And that story is, I haven't seen it anywhere. I'm not saying it isn't there, but that's a really important story, because you can see people kind of going, oh yeah, Pilgrims, they're cool. Or, oh, a cowboy, that's cool. Yeah, that's an American. But the shift of American citizenship from the ideals of the Declaration of Independence to the concept of who you're descended from and how long you've been in the land is a very profound change for America. And that's, I think, what the radical right, some of whom are fascists in the administration, are trying to do. And I'd like people to be aware of that because I am so dead set against that. To me, that's a complete rejection of everything America has ever stood for. That you can only be an American if your family's been here for a really long time. Just to me destroys everything that this country stands for. So that's one of the things that did not get paid attention to while we were focusing on Epstein. All right, so I want to leave you with a couple of things here. Um, and that's that I am hearing yet again so much about why aren't the Democrats unified? And here's what I would say to you about that. The Democrats need to do what the Democrats need to do. They are not the only group that is standing up against the rise of authoritarianism. The Democrats are enormously important to this country. Among other things, they have the resources, they have the mailing lists, they have the infrastructure in place to focus opposition and to reclaim the government. And that's no small thing. Their apparatus, in fact, is much better right now than the Republican apparatus because that has been completely corrupted by the Trump family. You know, they basically turned the Republican Party into the Trump Party, which means that if you're trying to sell cologne for the Trumps, you've got a great set of mailing lists. But if you're trying to promote, you know, a state senator in South Carolina, you're in trouble. And that's going to be an important difference in the upcoming elections. But what the Democrats can do to move those ideas forward is not the same as the American people saying what they want. This is our time. You know, the Democrats, and to some degree the Republicans and independents and Greens and whomever, will listen to what we say and will turn that into political candidates and a political movement. But I really don't want anybody to be sitting here waiting for some official word to come out of the Democratic Party. That's the opposite of the way it should be. We need to tell our representatives, not just Democrats and independents, but also Republicans, what we want. And they do listen. I mean, you can see that in the changes that we've seen in the bills that the Republicans have put forward that have been changed. But certainly up and coming leaders are going to change things as well in order to get elected. So I am not worried about the Democrats not yet having a unified voice because I'm not ready for them to have a unified voice. We need to hash out what we want. So for example, there's all this talk about the Democratic New York City mayoral candidate, Zoran Mamdani, being, talking, people are calling him a communist, people on the right. And yet the Trump administration has madly been buying up parts of different companies for the national government, giving the Trump administration real say in those companies, which is, by the way, the definition of a communist government when it controls the means of production. So we need to hash that stuff out to see where people stand on that and to make people understand that the old buzzwords of the past are just not going to cut it. So this, again, is our time to speak up and to tell people what we want and to pay attention to those people in the different parties who are doing those things. So, I did a deep dive the other day on Ed Markey of Massachusetts, who's not, running for higher office in the future. I mean, he's in the Senate. He does a great job. He's out there with young people every day talking about cheaper housing, talking about the kinds of issues that we associate with, at least that I associate with younger progressive Democrats or Democratic Socialists. And, he just doesn't get a lot of traction because people are like, oh, it's just Ed Markey. We got to get those names out there. We got to magnify those people. If they have messages that you like, highlight them. Today is the day of creating more good trouble, like John Lewis told us to. Let's do it, but let's also do it tomorrow and the next day. And the more that we speak up, the more that you will see Democratic leaders, but also independent leaders and Republican leaders starting to reflect the things that people like you and me about. So I wouldn't lose a lot of sleep right now over that. There will be time to come to complain that the parties are not articulating a vision. But right now, we need to force them to do that. And they will, if we put enough of our language into it and enough of our effort into it. So I hope that has been um, enough of a pep talk. I will say, I don't know about you all, finally, I'm tired. I'm tired. It's been a long haul here for a while. And I spent the day with my nephews and it was great. And we went swimming and I took them out for ice cream and do that. Put some of that in your life because we all need a break and you just cannot look at the news every day. It's too much. But there's a lot of pieces moving right now, and they are moving in ways that, for all that many of them are frightening and frustrating, there are also ways in which we are seeing good movement. And the more we speak up now in the summer, which again, by the way, summers always tend to be periods either of explosive politics or sort of people are less in the summer because their kids are home or whatever. Um, Everything is going to hit like a ton of bricks in the fall. It always does. Especially economic stuff. If you look at our major economic crises, they tend to happen in October, simply because all of a sudden people in September are like, oh, hey, the sun's not so warm anymore. Let's take a look at what's happening around us. And they go, oh my God. And then things start to travel quickly. So husband your resources now. Try and take a little bit of time for yourselves and keep speaking up, and we'll just keep facing it one step at a time. And do the best we can, because it's not, I think, as I don't want to jinx us. Let's just get out there and do it together, because things are changing very quickly and not in bad ways. All right, thank you for being here, and I will. I'm doing an interview tomorrow. Who am I doing an interview with tomorrow? I think I'm doing an interview with Jim Acosta tomorrow. And I think it is on Substack, maybe. I'm not quite nailed yet where I am on all these places. And I've got some great, great interviews coming up. And I did one today, actually, on the Michael Smerconish show with Bob Crawford, who's a friend. He does American history, and he's the bass player for the Avett Brothers. And he's cool. He's smart. So anyway, I'll be around. So I'll see you, I think, tomorrow, and then I should be on a better schedule next week going forward. Anyway, thank you for being here, and I'll see you again soon.